Unaware her homeless father owned a $100 billion mansion, Elena Hart watched her husband kick her out for being a nobody. But the moment the door slammed, a message arrived that her father was dead, and an estate lawyer was already waiting with a will that could turn her husband's new CEO bride into a scandal. Mark Hart didn't raise his voice as he shoved the divorce papers into Elena's hands, because cruelty hits harder when it's calm, especially when his polished mistress, CEO Vivian Cross, stood behind him smiling like Elena's life was just bad timing. Elena had spent years shrinking herself to survive, believing her father was a forgotten man on a street corner, a homeless shadow she visited in secret with food and silent tears. But now that same homeless father had left instructions, names, and a sealed envelope that didn't belong to poverty. Elena's heart broke in two directions at once: grief for the father she thought she'd lost long ago, and shock that he was never who the world said he was. But if he truly owned a $100 billion mansion, why did he live like he had nothing? And why did he warn Elena to never tell anyone what she might have? And when the estate lawyer begins to read from the will, what exactly will he reveal that leaves Mark, who called his wife a nobody, frozen in shock? And what secret about the CEO he chose over Elena will make him realize he didn't just abandon a woman, he walked away from the one person he should have feared losing? Elena didn't cry when Mark Hart kicked her out. Not at first. She stood barefoot on the cold marble foyer of the townhouse Mark loved to show off, holding a small overnight bag that looked insultingly light for a marriage that had lasted 7 years. The chandelier above her threw clean, expensive light over everything, over the glossy floors, over the framed magazine cover where Mark's face smiled beside the words "Rising Star," and over Vivian. Crossing the doorway, perfectly styled, perfectly still, like she'd been placed there to replace Elena. Mark's calm was surgical, the kind of calm that said he'd rehearsed this, maybe even enjoyed imagining it. He didn't yell, because yelling would mean Elena still had power over his emotions. "You're a nobody, Elena," he said, adjusting his cufflinks the way he did before investor calls. "I married potential. I got this." Vivian's lips curved without warmth. "Sign and go," she added softly, like it was advice between women, not a victory lap. Elena's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She stared at Mark and felt a strange, sharp flash of the man he used to be, back when they were both broke, back when his ambition sounded like a dream instead of a threat. She remembered a cramped apartment, a cheap fan rattling at night, Mark pulling her close and whispering, "When I make it, I'll make sure no one ever looks down on you again." Memory cracked and collapsed under the present. "You're really doing this tonight," Elena managed, because her voice was the only thing in the room that still belonged to her. "Tonight is efficient," Mark replied. He slid the divorce papers toward her with a smooth push, like he was moving a plate across the table. "Vivian and I leave for Zurich in 2 days. I won't drag this out. Just sign." Elena's gaze drifted to the wall where Mark had hung a framed photo of himself, shaking hands with powerful men. In the glass, her reflection floated, smaller than she remembered. She realized Mark didn't just want to divorce her. He wanted to erase the version of himself that had ever needed her. "You don't belong in my future," he said, and the words landed with the weight of a final verdict. Vivian stepped forward half a pace, heels clicking like punctuation. Her eyes swept Elena from head to toe. Plain clothes, tired eyes, simple ring, and something like disgust. Flickered, quickly masked by CEO polish. "She's always been quiet," Vivian murmured, not quite to Mark and not quite to Elena. "It's almost impressive how little she takes up space." Elena swallowed. For years, she had learned to be small because small meant safe. Growing up, safe had been a moving target. Different schools, different addresses, her mother gone too early, and a father who disappeared into the world's harshest corner. The world had taught Elena that visibility invited harm, so she had made herself unremarkable on purpose. But even as Elena stood there shrinking, a different memory tried to surface, one she'd kept locked away like a guilty secret. A street corner near the old train station, the smell of metal and exhaust, a man sitting with a worn cap on his knees, not begging, just existing. Samuel Hart, her father, the homeless shadow the world walked past. The first time she'd sat beside him, she'd expected him to say, "Thank You when she offered food. Instead, he'd said, not food, sit. So she sat on the curb, ignoring the stares. Samuel had looked at her with eyes too calm for a man who owned nothing. Do you like the man you married? He asked. Or do you like being married? Elena had laughed nervously back then. That's a strange question. Samuel's gaze had held hers like he could see through her ribs. Strange questions save people. Easy questions bury them. And then, quietly, as a black car idled at the traffic light behind them, tinted windows, too expensive for that street, Samuel had said a rule Elena never forgot. Never tell anyone what you might have. Elena had frowned. Dad, what does that even mean? Samuel's mouth had barely moved. It means the people who love you for you should be able to find you even when you look like nothing. Now standing in Mark's mansion-like townhouse, Elena felt that old rule press against her ribs like a warning that had finally reached its deadline. Mark tapped the papers. Well, you're dragging it. Elena stared at the signature line, and a small, humiliating part of her almost wanted to beg. Not for the marriage. She could feel it already dead, but for dignity. For a moment where Mark looked at her and remembered she was a human being. But Vivian's smile sharpened. If you need a pen, she said, I can lend you one. Consider it my parting gift. Mark exhaled, irritated. Stop making this harder than it has to be. You brought nothing into this marriage. I brought you peace, Elena whispered before she could stop herself. Mark laughed under his breath. Peace doesn't pay dividends. The words hit her like a slap because they weren't new. They were the final form of something he'd been becoming for years. Since the first promotion, since the first time he'd come home drunk on his own importance and said, people like us don't. Apologize. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The vibration was small, but it cut through the room like a knife through silk. Elena froze. She didn't know why fear rose so fast. Her father was never in her daily life. He was a quiet shame she carried in secret. Food runs, short conversations, small cash she hid from Mark because Mark would have called it embarrassing charity. She pulled the phone out. Unknown number. He's gone. Come now. Don't bring Mark. Elena's lungs forgot how to work. For a heartbeat, Mark's voice became distant noise. Vivian's presence became a blur. The entire world narrowed to two words. He's gone. Samuel, the man who never sounded helpless, the man who always looked like he was waiting for something. Gone. Elena's fingers shook so hard she almost dropped the phone. Another buzz followed immediately, like the sender knew she'd need proof this was real. The lawyer is here. He asked for you by name. Elena looked up slowly. Mark was still talking, still slicing. You'll survive the way you always have, quietly, cheaply. Vivian's eyes watched Elena's face with predatory interest, trying to read the text reflected in her eyes like it was a stock chart. Elena heard Samuel's voice in her head, not as a memory but as a presence. When the lie collapses, don't be standing under it. Her hands moved before her heart caught up. She folded the divorce papers neatly without reading them. The calmness surprised even her, like something inside her had snapped into place. Mark blinked. What are you doing? Elena nodded once, a single, controlled motion. Okay. Vivian's smile widened. Smart girl. But Elena didn't look at Vivian. She didn't look at Mark. She turned and walked. Mark's voice sharpened behind her. Where do you think you're going? Elena paused at the door just long enough to let her words land like a stone. To bury someone you never deserved to. Meet. Then she stepped into the night. The cold air hit her face, and grief rose so violently it almost knocked her down. But underneath the grief was something else, something stranger, darker, sharper. Because if Samuel Hart was truly homeless, why would an estate lawyer be waiting? And if he wasn't homeless at all, then what kind of life had he been hiding? And why had he hidden it from his own daughter? Elena's taxi cut through the city like a blade that didn't know where to land. Streetlights slid across the window, and in each passing reflection she saw a different version of herself. Wife, nobody, daughter, orphan, until none of them fit. Her phone stayed clenched in her hand like it could start ringing with an explanation if she squeezed hard enough. When the driver slowed near the old train station, Elena's stomach tightened. The neighborhood hadn't changed. The same tired storefronts, the same cracked sidewalks, the same corner where people pretended not to see whoever sat there, The taxi stopped outside a small clinic tucked behind a row of shuttered shops, the kind of place that smelled like antiseptic and quiet desperation. Elena paid with trembling fingers and stepped out. The air here felt different, heavier, like the night itself was holding its breath. She rushed toward the clinic entrance and froze. Two men in suits stood near the door, not the sloppy suits of men trying to look important, the kind of clean tailoring that belonged in boardrooms and private jets. One spoke softly into an earpiece. The other watched the street with the stillness of someone trained to notice everything. Elena's first instinct was fear. Her second was disbelief, because men like that didn't guard homeless people. She took a step closer. The man without the earpiece looked at her, not with suspicion but recognition. He didn't ask who she was. He simply shifted to the side, clearing the doorway like she had the right to enter. A chill ran up Elena's spine. Inside, the clinic lights were too bright for the hour. A tired nurse at the desk glanced up, then quickly looked down again, as if she'd been told not to interfere. Elena followed the corridor to the last room, her footsteps muffled by old linoleum. Before she reached the door, she heard voices. Low, controlled, legal. Confirmed identity, someone was saying. Time of death logged. Next phase proceeds as instructed. Elena's hand hovered over the doorknob. Her fingers were numb. She pushed the door open. Samuel Hart lay still on the bed, cleaned up. His hair was combed back. His face, usually weathered and guarded, looked strangely peaceful, like the burden of pretending had finally been set down. His hands were folded neatly, and on one finger sat a thin gold ring Elena had never seen before. A ring that looked expensive in a quiet way, like it didn't need to prove anything. Elena's breath shattered. "Dad!" The word escaped her like a child calling into darkness. She stepped closer, and the world narrowed until it was only her and the man she'd kept visiting in secret. The man she'd fed and listened to. The man who'd asked questions that felt like warnings. A flash of memory hit her. Samuel on that curb, staring at a luxury car that had paused too long at the light. He'd gone very still, then smiled faintly at Elena like nothing had happened. At the time, she'd thought he was just zoning out. Now she wondered if he'd been watching someone watching him. Elena Hart. The voice pulled her back. At the foot of the bed stood a man in a charcoal suit with silver hair, holding a briefcase like it weighed more than paperwork. His eyes weren't cruel, but they were sharp, the kind that had seen families destroy themselves over money and still showed up to read the fine print. Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand, ashamed of the tears she couldn't stop. "Yes." He opened the briefcase with slow precision. "My name is Arthur Hawthorne. I am the estate lawyer for Samuel Hart." Elena blinked hard, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. "Estate lawyer? There's a mistake. My father, he was homeless." Hawthorne finished calmly, as if repeating a rumor he'd heard too many times. "That is what the world believed. It is not what was true." Elena's knees weakened. She gripped the side of the bed to steady herself, fingers brushing the crisp sheet, the strange ring, her father's folded hands. Hawthorne pulled out a sealed envelope, thick cream paper wax stamped with a crest. The same kind of crest you see on old money and older secrets. "He anticipated you wouldn't believe anything you heard," Hawthorne said. "He left instructions for how this must unfold. He also left warnings." Elena swallowed. "Warnings about what?" Hawthorne's gaze held. Hers. "About your husband." Elena flinched as if Mark's name had been spoken aloud. Hawthorne slid a second document forward, an official notice. "We are convening a will reading in 48 hours. Your father insisted certain people must be present." "Who?" Elena whispered, though she already felt the answer in the pit of her stomach. Hawthorne didn't blink. "Mark Hart and Vivian Cross." Elena's throat tightened. Why would my father want them there?" Hawthorne glanced at Samuel, then back at Elena, and for the first time his professional mask softened into something almost human. "Because Samuel Hart didn't hide his life for sport," he said. 15 years ago, someone inside his empire tried to kill him. Betrayal nearly ended him. He disappeared publicly so he could survive privately. And he watched everyone, especially the people who got close to you. Elena's mind spun, trying to stitch her memories into this new reality. The black cars, the questions, the way Samuel never panicked around police, the way he spoke about contracts like someone who'd written them. "You're saying..." Elena's voice broke. You're saying my father was— Hawthorne didn't give her the easy version. He gave her the truth like a weight. Samuel Hart built Hartwell Global Holdings, he said. Real estate, infrastructure, private equity, global assets held through trusts and layers. He owned far more than the world can imagine. One of his primary properties alone is valued at roughly $100 billion. Elena's heart stopped. $100 billion. Hawthorne nodded once. A mansion, an estate, a fortress disguised as a home. And now, by his instruction, it belongs to you. Elena stared at him, shaking. Grief and shock tangled until she couldn't tell which was choking her more. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered, tears spilling again. Why live like that? Why— Let me think. Hawthorne's voice lowered, because he needed to know if you would still sit beside him when you thought he was nothing, and because he needed to know who would love you only when they thought you were. Elena's chest ached so fiercely it felt like punishment. Hawthorne placed the sealed envelope into her trembling hands. This is not to be opened yet. He wanted the will read aloud first. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the record. And Elena. He paused, letting the next words hook into her like a barb. He left something else, a packet labeled Cross. Elena's blood ran cold. Vivian. Hawthorne nodded. Your father knew exactly who she was. Elena looked at Samuel's peaceful face, at the ring she'd never noticed, at the suited men outside who didn't belong to this neighborhood, and she realized something terrifying. Mark didn't just throw her out. He threw her out right before the world changed. And whatever her father planned to reveal in that will, it wasn't just an inheritance. It was a reckoning. 48 hours later, Elena sat in a private conference room so quiet it felt like the building itself had been paid to keep secrets. The table was polished dark wood, the walls glass and steel, and the air smelled faintly of money, clean, cold, controlled. 2 security guards stood by the door, not for Elena, for what was about to be said. She kept her hands folded in her lap to hide how they trembled. Hawthorne sat at the head of the table with a thick folder and a small recording device placed dead center, like a silent witness nobody could intimidate. Elena had barely slept since the clinic. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Samuel's face, peaceful and unreadable, and heard his rule in her head. Never tell anyone what you might have. Now she understood why. The door opened. Mark walked in first, dressed like he was attending an award ceremony instead of a funeral matter. His eyes found Elena immediately, and his expression shifted into something soft, manufactured regret, the kind he used with clients when he'd made a mistake but didn't want to admit it. Elena, he said gently, like he hadn't kicked her out with an overnight bag. I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. Elena didn't answer. She watched him like she was seeing a stranger wearing her husband's face. Vivian Cross entered behind him, flawless as ever, hair sleek, posture straight, a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. She carried herself like someone used to rooms bending around her. She didn't look at Elena first. She looked at the table, the guards, the recording device, measuring risk. Hawthorne stood. Mr. Mark Hart, Miss Vivian Cross, thank you for attending. Please take a seat. Mark's gaze flicked to the guards. Is all this necessary? Yes, Hawthorne said evenly. Per instruction of the deceased, this session is recorded. Vivian's lips curved. How dramatic. Hawthorne didn't react. He waited until everyone sat, then clicked the recorder on. The tiny light blinked red, alive, unforgiving. Proceed, Hawthorne said, opening the folder. I will begin with a statement from Samuel Hart. Elena's throat tightened. Hawthorne read, voice calm, each word landing like a deliberate knock on a locked door. If you are hearing this, it means I am dead in the only way that matters, beyond control. Elena, you were kind to a man the world taught you to step over. That kindness was not weakness. It was your inheritance long before money ever was. Elena's eyes blurred. Mark shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, like warmth had entered a room he preferred cold. Hawthorne turned a page. To Mark Hart, you called my daughter a nobody. You will learn today how expensive that insult is. Mark scoffed quickly, too quickly. Look, can we get to the assets? I'm here out of respect, but— Vivian touched Mark's arm with a subtle pressure, a leash disguised as affection. Let him read, she murmured. Hawthorne slid a document across the table toward Mark and Vivian without breaking rhythm. You may follow along. Mark glanced at it, then frowned. Vivian leaned slightly, reading faster than Mark, and Elena saw it. The first crack in Vivian's certainty. Not fear yet. Calculation. Hawthorne continued. Samuel Hart bequeaths the following to Elena Hart, sole biological child. He pushed a photo forward, an aerial image that looked like fiction. Black stone, white balconies, acres of manicured gardens, a lake like a mirror, a property that didn't look like a house. It looked like a kingdom. At the bottom, in cold print, Blackstone Manor, primary residence and attached holdings, approximate value, $100 billion. Mark leaned forward, face draining as if someone had pulled the plug on his blood. No, that's not real. Hawthorne's eyes stayed steady. It is real. Blackstone Manor is held by the Hartwell Family Trust. The trust's primary beneficiary is Elena Hart, effective immediately. Mark's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Elena like she'd just transformed into someone dangerous. Vivian's smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. Interesting, she said softly. So Elena is wealthy. Congratulations. Hawthorne turned another page. Additionally, Elena Hart receives 51% controlling interest in Hartwell Global Holdings via transfer of voting shares held in escrow. She receives full access codes to Vault Holdings and authority to restructure executive leadership. Mark's chair creaked as he sat back hard, stunned. Hartwell Global? That is your father-in-law's company, Hawthorne finished. The company you once tried to pitch your growth ideas to under a different name. Mark's breath hitched. Elena remembered Mark coming home weeks ago frustrated, saying some anonymous holding group refused to meet him. She'd rubbed his shoulders and told him it would be okay. Now she realized Samuel had been watching, even then, weighing Mark's hunger. Mark turned to Elena, voice trembling with sudden softness. Elena, we can talk about this. Whatever happened between us. Elena cut him off quietly. You kicked me out because you thought I was nothing. Vivian finally looked directly at Elena, her eyes cool. We're not here for marriage therapy. This is business. Hawthorne's gaze moved to Vivian like a spotlight snapping on. Ms. Cross, you are correct. And business is exactly why you are named in this will. Vivian's posture tightened. Excuse me, Hawthorne read. To Vivian Cross, you built your career on other people's blind spots. You targeted my daughter's marriage because you believed she had no foundation. You were wrong. Vivian's laugh was small and sharp. This is defamatory. Hawthorne placed a thick sealed packet on the table, the label in bold, Cross. Elena's pulse thundered. The air changed. Even Mark looked confused now, turning toward Vivian. What is that? Vivian's eyes flashed. Nothing. Hawthorne opened the packet slowly. Inside were copies, offshore transfers, forged signatures, insider trading trails, and a printed email chain. Hawthorne lifted one page and read aloud, his voice steady as a guillotine. Vivian describing Mark as a clean public story and Elena as a useful blind spot, and discussing how marrying Mark would position her to access Hart family unknown assets. Mark stared, horrified. Vivian's face hardened. Don't be dramatic. Hawthorne didn't pause long enough for anyone to breathe. Per instruction, these documents have been delivered to the Hartwell Board and relevant authorities. This reading serves as acknowledgement that you were informed. Vivian stood abruptly, chair scraping. This is insane. I'm leaving. Security shifted subtly to block the door. Vivian stopped, jaw tight. Mark's voice cracked as he turned to Elena, panic rising. Elena, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about your father. Elena's voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than shouting. You didn't need to know about my father to treat me like a human. Hawthorne turned to the final pages, and his expression sharpened like even he respected the precision of what came next. Mark Hart will receive $1, Hawthorne read. Not as cruelty, but as evidence. So no one can claim Samuel Hart forgot him. Mark's face contorted. $1 after 7 years. Hawthorne continued. Additionally, due to a pre-filed marital misconduct clause and a no contest provision, any attempt to challenge this will trigger immediate release of recorded evidence to the court. Mark's head snapped up. Recorded evidence? Hawthorne nodded, including footage of you changing account passwords after locking Elena out. including witness statements about your intent to transfer marital assets and Ms. Cross's communications. Vivian's composure finally slipped. Her fingers curled into a fist at her side. Mark looked like he might collapse. "Elena, please." Elena stood slowly, the room suddenly too small for what she'd become in the last 48 hours. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her grief was still there, raw, but it stood beside something stronger now. Clarity. "You called me a nobody," she said, "but my father saw everything you were before I did." Mark reached for her. Elena stepped back. Hawthorne read the final instruction. "Mark Hart will serve 1 year as the public director of the Samuel Hart Outreach Foundation, serving the homeless community near the station where my daughter once sat beside me. If he refuses, the foundation's endowment will be donated under a banner identifying him and his abandonment." Mark's face went white. The humiliation hit him like a physical blow, because it wasn't just loss. It was exposure. Elena looked at Mark one last time, voice steady. "You didn't lose me because my father was rich. You lost me because you were willing to throw a person away and sleep fine after." Then she turned and walked out, leaving Mark trapped between the CEO who used him and the will that dismantled him, while her father's final test echoed in the silence. Elena walked out of the conference room with her legs steady and her heart in pieces. The hallway outside felt too normal, white walls, soft carpet, muted lights, like the building hadn't just witnessed the collapse of 2 lives. Behind her, through the sealed door, she could still hear faint movement, a chair scraping, a voice rising, the kind of chaos that happens when people realize the floor they stood on was never real. A black sedan waited at the curb. The suited man from the clinic stepped forward and opened the back door without a word, like this had always been the plan. Elena hesitated, her fingers hovering above the handle, because accepting the car felt like accepting everything she still couldn't fully understand. Inside the car, the leather smelled new. Too new for grief. Hawthorne slid in across from her, his briefcase on his knees. He didn't speak for a moment, letting Elena breathe. Outside, the city moved on. People laughing, taxis honking, neon signs blinking, as if the universe hadn't just revealed that Samuel Hart, the homeless man on a curb, had been a king in exile. Elena's voice came out thin. "I keep thinking, if I had known, I would have saved him." Hawthorne finished quietly. Elena's eyes filled again. "I would have brought him home. I would have taken him away from that corner." Hawthorne's gaze softened. "He would have gone back anyway." Elena frowned. "Why?" Hawthorne opened his briefcase and removed the sealed envelope, the one he had given Elena at the clinic. "Because he wasn't hiding from comfort," he said. "He was hiding from people who could weaponize comfort against you." He slid the envelope toward her. "This is yours now. You're allowed to open it after the will reading." Elena stared at the wax seal. Her fingers shook as she broke it. Inside was a single letter, Samuel's handwriting steady, elegant, like his hand had never trembled on a street corner. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means you're standing in the part of life where the truth feels heavier than grief. Breathe. You were built for this. You may hate me for living as homeless. You may think I abandoned you. I didn't. I stayed close enough to protect you, far enough to keep the wolves from smelling you. 15 years ago, man I trusted tried to kill me for my company. When I survived, I learned something. The most dangerous enemies don't attack the king. They attack the king's bloodline. So I disappeared. I made the world believe Samuel Hart was finished, broke, irrelevant. Then I watched. I watched you become gentle without becoming weak. I watched you choose love. Then I watched that love turn into entitlement in your husband's eyes. I didn't hide my wealth from you because I didn't trust you. I hid it because I trusted your heart too much. A good heart tries to save everyone. The wrong people will drain you dry and call it love. There is a key taped behind the photo frame you once gave me, the frame you thought was the only luxury I allowed myself. Take the key. Go to Blackstone Manor. Don't bring Mark. Don't bring anyone who didn't sit with you when you were alone. And, Elena, I need you to do one last thing for me. Forgive me when you're ready. But do not tolerate cruelty ever again. Dad." Elena's breath broke into a sob she couldn't hold back. It was ugly and raw and finally honest. Not just the sob of a daughter who lost her father, but of a woman realizing her father had loved her in a way so strategic it looked like absence. The car pulled up to a quiet private bank. Hawthorne guided her inside, through a discreet entrance, past security that nodded like they'd been waiting for her all along. Elena's mind drifted in fragments. Samuel's calm voice, Mark's cold smile, Vivian's tightening jaw, and then landed on one memory that suddenly made sense. Months ago, Samuel had asked her, "If you had power, what would you protect?" Elena had answered without thinking, "People who get stepped on." Samuel had smiled then, faint and proud. Now Hawthorne stopped before a vault door and handed Elena a small metal key. "This is the safe deposit box," he said. "Your father called it the spine of the truth." Elena inserted the key with hands that still trembled. The box slid out with a soft metallic sigh. Inside were three things: a set of estate keys engraved black stone, a thin folder marked training, private mentorship contracts, course completion records, and a letter from a corporate advisor confirming Elena's 18 months of preparation, and a small worn cap, the same cap Samuel used to hold on his knees at the train station. Elena touched it gently, as if it might still be warm. Hawthorne watched her. "He wanted you to keep it," he said, "so you never forget the corner where you learned who you are." Elena closed her eyes. The highs and lows crashed together, pain and power, love and betrayal, poverty, and a $100 billion mansion, until she felt dizzy. But underneath it all, something settled. Purpose. Outside the bank, her phone buzzed again. A final scheduled message from Samuel, sent through Hawthorne's system the moment the will reading concluded. "Don't be afraid of what you become. Be afraid of what you tolerate." Elena stared at the screen until her tears dried. Then she stood taller, because now she understood the true inheritance wasn't the mansion. It wasn't the shares. It wasn't even the will that shocked Mark into silence. It was the line Samuel had drawn through her life. Cruelty ends here. As Elena stepped back into the car, she looked out at the city, at the people rushing, at the corners where the invisible sat unnoticed, and she made a silent vow that would change everything that came next. Mark had called her a nobody, but Samuel Hart had turned nobody into a name the powerful would soon whisper carefully, because the daughter who once sat on a curb beside a homeless man was now the owner of Blackstone Manor, and the one person in the room who understood what money was really for.